Hello, and welcome to the Phoenix Burning Podcast. There is a phase of the Phoenix cycle where it burns and returns to ash, a phase we often overlook in favor of the more inspirational Phoenix Rising. However, sometimes we need to burn away the old before we're ready for the new. I am Veronika, an intuitive guide and transformation coach, and in this podcast, I share my audio diary chronicling my burning phase. These recordings are completely raw and unfiltered, often recorded while I walk around outside in nature, and I release them to you in their unedited state in the hopes that you may find comfort, hope, and maybe some inspiration as you go through your burning.
I feel like I'm experiencing a full system collapse. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And in this episode, I'm going to share where I am right now, where I've been in the past, in the hopes that maybe this will provide some hope and inspiration to anyone listening. And perhaps more importantly, so what am I experiencing right now? I'll start with what I'm experiencing right now, and then I will share where I've been in the past and how it's different. Perhaps what you're experiencing is where I'm at now. Perhaps it's more similar to where I've been in the past. And there's different, I really believe that there's different tools and strategies and processes that support us depending on where we are in our journey and on our healing path. So I'm going to share where I am now, where I've been in the past, and why I'm recording this podcast and where this podcast is going to go. So right now I'm experiencing what I'm calling a full system collapse. If you're familiar with my work at all, you will know that when I use the word system, I use that to refer to our whole being. So when I use the word system, I use that word to refer to what I refer to as our 7 layers of being. So we have our physical body, and our physical body consists of our physical self, and then also our mind, our brain being an organ in our body, and our emotions, which are governed in a lot of ways by the different systems in our body. So we have our foundational 3 layers, which is our physical, mental, and emotional. Then we have our energetic layer, which is the electromagnetic field that courses through our body and extends a few inches outside of our body. In other frameworks, this may be referred to as chi, ethereal energy, or some of the other words that I use for that. Then there's our energy body, which is our electromagnetic field pulsating out around us. Usually considered to be about 3 to 6 feet outside from us. And then we have the energy fabric, which connects all of our energy bodies together. And then we have source, which is the source of energy from where all of these energetic bodies come from. So when it comes to healing, of course, all of those layers work together. So it's often helpful to work on multiple layers at once. Sometimes one layer needs more attention than others. So if you're in a significant space of shutdown, where you're just having a difficult time functioning, you may need more support on your physical layer, making sure your adrenal system, your endocrine system, and all those things are working properly. So right now, I'm experiencing what feels like a full system collapse. My physical body is very unwell. I won't go into all the symptoms here for purposes of time, but I'm in a lot of pain throughout my whole body, and weakness and fatigue and brain fog. Sort of only functional 3 to 5 hours a day right now. I've experienced challenges on the somatic level before. If you're familiar with my story, you know that I struggled with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia for many years, about 15 years. about 10 years, from 2007 to 2016, 17 is when I started healing after I left my marriage to a narcissistic personality type. I'm a quantum healer. So I spend every day in meditation, usually about an hour. The meditations vary, but most often I go back to my quantum meditations because they're the ones that I find most powerful and most effective. And I'm still doing my meditations right now. I really can't imagine life without my meditations. But I can tell that I'm really struggling with connecting to the frequency that I normally feel. So oftentimes I'll go into a quantum meditation and I can experience a lot of healing, emotional and physical. And certainly while I'm in the meditation, I feel a certain vibration, a certain frequency as I connect to the different energetic realms. And I'm really struggling to feel that. I'm really struggling to feel and hear my intuition. That's not uncommon when my physical body is in a lot of pain, for it to mute the intuitive aspects and the energy body. So that's why the somatic body is so important. The somatic body, that's redundant. I have brain fog right now, so not everything I say might make complete sense. The physical body is so important. I really think it's the key to everything. I mean, we are a human being having a human experience. I can go on about the physical, about the body, the somatic level for a long time. At any rate, I feel a collapse in my physical body, which I've experienced before. I'm feeling a collapse on my energy body where I'm really struggling to connect and feel that frequency. And then on the emotional level as well, I think it all kind of ties back to the physical body because my nerves are constantly firing. So I have sort of like pins and needles and firing and like burning sensations in my arms and legs and hands and feet, especially in my hands. So I can tell that my nerves are just overactivated. On an emotional level, that means I'm very irritable and everything's annoying, which is unusual for me. Again, if you've listened to my story before, you'll know that one of the reasons I started doing this work as a transformation coach is because I was feeling peace and joy on such a consistent level, regardless of what was going on around me. And that's the aspect that I really want to speak to today and perhaps throughout this podcast. Things that I'm observing in the healing community that are really problematic when you're in the space that I'm experiencing now. So I already spoke to the collapse in the physical body. I spoke to the disconnection or the muted feeling on my energy body level. And then the irritability on my emotional level. My cognitive level is quite good, interestingly enough, and that's part of what's frustrating about my current experience, is that I have a very high level of awareness of everything that I'm experiencing. I have a high level of understanding on both a personal level and a meta level. In other words, I can see the greater good in the things that are transpiring that are causing me such physical stress. So that part is very, in fact, I was going for a walk with a friend the other day and shared what was happening currently and shared my positive takeaway. And he's someone who's usually quite calm. He's someone I can really lean on to be in a crisis or in a difficult situation. He's just reasonable, grounded, calm kind of person. And he got kind of fired up and he was like, well, that's great that you're able to, he was being serious. He's like, it's fantastic that you're able to see sort of the positives on what's a very shitty situation. And he was very angry. Not at me, but that, he didn't really think there was a bright side to the situation. So that's the part that's very difficult, is that I do have a high level of understanding, and which normally is something that really supports people in their healing when they're able to see the bigger picture, when they're able to pull their mind out of the story. That's often a critical part of healing, and in fact, I would say one of the keys in healing for most people, because we are such a brain-based society right now. We put so much weight on the mind. And the people that I work with and other people that I know who've dealt with emotional trauma, that's usually where they struggle the most, is getting out of their minds, getting into their bodies, and being able to see things on this higher level. So, how is this changing my approach to healing? I don't know that it's necessarily changing my approach, but there's an observation I want to share. With the side note that my nerves are firing and everything is irritating to me, right? But as I scroll through Facebook and read emails and things from other coaches and healers, and even just people, well-intentioned people, right, who are like, stay positive, find the joy, be in gratitude, all these different practices, just change your vibration. What else? I could probably think of a few. I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you see that you're like, eye roll? And they're making me so angry that I have to, not really angry, irritated, which I already am, that I have to kind of step away. Here's the thing about all those things. I teach them too. They're perfectly valid. And they work. And in fact, they've worked for the majority of the other types of trauma and life experiences that I've had. And so that's why I want to share with you sort of where I'm at now, what I've experienced in the past, and the different tools that I've used at different stages, because they don't all work depending on where you're at. So I'll start with where I am now and how it's different from where I've been in the past. So I already shared, I'm feeling this full system collapse. And I actually kind of remember when it happened. I was sitting in my meditation chair and I was like, something's wrong. And this was after many stressful events involving my children. And I was like, something's wrong. I can't connect to the life force within myself. That is something that with practice and training, I've always been able to do. And it's something that's gotten me through a lot of difficult situations. My system feels empty. And with quantum healing, something you can do is connect with Source and different aspects of Source. Might be Divine Feminine, Divine Masculine, something else, Holy Mother, Holy Father, Source as a whole. And you're able to receive energy from Source. And it's incredibly healing. And it's something I do frequently. It's something that when I do typically shifts my vibration and shifts my viewpoint, my energy, all those things. And I'm barely able to do that right now, but I am able to do it. And it helps a little bit. But it's like the system is so collapsed. It's like you're taking a car that is completely broken down and just won't start, and you're like putting gas in the gas tank. And the gas tank fills up, but the car still won't start because it needs a new engine. That's what it feels like right now. And the image that came to mind, if you're a Star Wars fan by any chance, is there's a scene in one of the Star Wars movies, assuming that this isn't a spoiler alert since Star Wars has been around for so long. I think it's in the third movie when Anakin is going over in the process of going over to the dark side, and his wife Padme follows him, forget to which planet, and is watching him and is realizing that he has already gone over to the dark side, and she didn't see it or know it. And she's giving birth to their babies, their twins, which is Luke and Leia, right? And she's dying. And there's a medical bot, and there's someone else, I can't remember who else is in the scene, but there's somebody who's asking, what is wrong with Padme? Can't you help her? And the medical bot is doing everything that they can do. And the medical bot finally just says something like, she's lost her will to live. And there was nothing that they could do. And she gave birth and she died. And it wasn't because there was anything medically wrong with her, but it's because she lost her will to live. And that's how I feel in this moment. And it's not that I've lost my will to live on a mental level. I haven't at all, which is so bizarre. Now, let me share with you that in my past, I've struggled with depression. I first dealt with depression when I was, I first dealt with suicidal ideation when I was in the 6th grade. Can't remember how long the depression had been there prior to that. And I dealt with chronic depression, mostly mild chronic depression, until my early 40s. And I've been depression-free for, I think, 5 or 6 years now. 6 years. And during that time, sometimes it was more severe than others. And I have been suicidal at a few different times in my life. So I know what that feels like when you truly do not want to live anymore. And that is not how I feel. I do not feel depressed emotionally. I do not feel without hope. I have a lot of hope. I can see the other side. This is where earlier I said my mental awareness is really good. I know I'm going through a tunnel. And I can see that there's a light. It's just really fucking far away right now. And I know that I just need to keep putting one step in front of the other. And not just keep putting one step in front of the other, but take intentional action in order to support my system in being restored out of this collapse. So it's not a depression or a desire to no longer be alive. It is literally like the life force has simply drained out of me. So without going into too many gory details, I'll share a little bit about why I believe I am where I'm at right now. So interesting, even as I'm about to talk about it, I feel the pain rising up, which is why I know that a lot of this physical pain I'm dealing with is likely connected to my emotional pain. So I left my ex-husband at the end of 2015. And after I left, realized that he was a narcissist. And narcissistic personality disorder, I should say, which is very different from just having narcissistic characteristics. So he has a personality disorder. He's deeply dysfunctional. I'm realizing over time just really how dysfunctional he is. And it was even a couple years later beyond that when I realized how dysfunctional my birth family was. And so that's been a process. And a lot of my healing has been around understanding these things, and then first understanding, going through a process of deep embodiment and presence, which if you are not familiar with that is where I would really suggest that you start regardless of where you are in your journey. It is the key from my experience in being free from depression, as well as other pains and I'll say dysfunctions or maladaptations in your body and emotionally on the bottom 3 levels, the emotional, the somatic, cognitive, and emotional levels. So if you're not familiar with presence and embodiment, really being connected with your body. Okay, so where was I? So I learned about narcissistic personality disorder, the dysfunctions in my own birth family, which is so important. I can't tell you how many people, both clients and friends and peers, who talk about how they had a fine childhood, an okay childhood, without realizing how dysfunctional their childhood really was. And I'm still learning, 6 years along in my journey here of trauma recovery, really the depth to which that dysfunction affected me and my children and others, my siblings, etc. So you may not have had a quote-unquote abusive childhood in terms of physical abuse or even verbal abuse or even or sexual abuse, right? Things that are more visible and more easily identified and described. That doesn't mean that your childhood was nurturing and nourishing to your system. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't dysfunctional, which can lead to trauma in your body. So if you're someone who's new in your recovery process, your healing process, if you're recovering from narcissistic trauma, whether with a partner or family members, the things that I recommend is really understanding narcissism. There's so many tools out there on that, which is one of the reasons I don't talk about it too much. Learning how to interact with somebody with narcissistic personality disorder or other, I'll say cluster B disorders, people who are very manipulative, I'll just say manipulative, or have deep mood swings and things like that. There are tools that are effective for interacting with those people, because you may need to, whether it's an ex that you have shared custody with children, whether it's a family member that you choose not to cut out from your life, or perhaps it's a coworker. And often the way that you may interact with somebody like that may be quite different from the way you would interact with somebody who is not displaying a disordered personality, or I'll say maladaptations, maladaptive behaviors. Maladaptive being something that is more harmful, is an adaptation that you've taken on for some reason, but it's more harmful than helpful. So it's a term one of my colleagues started using, and I think it works very well. So you may hear me using that term, maladaptive behaviors or maladaptive personalities. So deep presence and physical embodiment, which is something that I teach if you're interested in, and then learning tools for communicating effectively with somebody with maladaptive behaviors. So I said I would share a little bit about where I've been in the past and where I am now and how it's different. So I'll just share a couple of milestones in my life that you may be already familiar with, right? But so one is leaving my narcissistic marriage, or my marriage to a maladaptive person, I'll put it that way. And during that time, of course, I was in what I call shutdown, because I was experiencing chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, fibromyalgia, low energy, all those kinds of things. And I needed to rebuild my life because I had become very isolated. And I learned about narcissism, all these different things that needed to happen. And while I was in a state of what I call shutdown, it did not feel like this collapse that my system is in right now. In other words, I could implement all these different tools and strategies that you are probably familiar with, positive affirmations and connecting with a support group and all those different things, learning about narcissism, and it supported me in moving forward. So even though I was feeling very shut down, I still had the ability to move forward. In other words, I was out of gas, but my engine was still working. So all these different tools filled up my gas tank and allowed me to keep going. I had another experience a few years later where I fell very much in love with somebody and ended up having probably the biggest heartbreak of my life. And again, it felt in some ways like a collapse. I was in so much pain and heartbreak, and decided to take a break from dating, which I did for a couple of years, which turned into longer because of the pandemic and whatnot. And so that was definitely a level of pain. And I was sort of shut down for a month or two. I can't remember how long, maybe about a month, before I was able to kind of start getting out there again and doing the things that you're supposed to do to help yourself feel better. And again, I had that life force energy. I was able to, my pain, I have a friend and colleague who asks, what is the power in your pain? And I was able to find the power in my pain. In fact, that particular painful event is what spurred me on to learning a lot of the tools that I now use with clients that are deeply powerful and transformational. So that particular life event was incredibly pivotal. I suspect that when I get to the other side of this event, I will have learned some new things that will provide even deeper transformation, which is one of the reasons that I decided to chronicle my experience as I walk through it. And most of these episodes I intend to keep shorter, maybe to 30 minutes or so. But for this first one, I wanted to be able to provide the full background. So those were some other times where I experienced pain and shutdown, but I was able to use all these different effective strategies that are out there to put gas in my gas tank and keep going. There's a couple things that happened this time around. One is that, as I've shared with people in the past, so you may already be aware of this, or if you're new to me, I mentioned it earlier in this episode, that I have experienced, that I dealt with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, and I was able to heal. The fibromyalgia I was able to heal completely. And even the chronic fatigue syndrome, I healed to, I would say, somewhere between 80 or 90%. What that looks like is I was unable in the past to make it through the day without a nap, in addition to sleeping probably 10 hours a night. I had to really plan things that I did, because things with something simple like driving an hour to go for example, I was working in corporate at the time. Sometimes I'd have to go to another office, and it was maybe an hour drive away. That drive would completely sap me of energy, and I'd have to recover for 3 days afterwards. Yeah, you heard that right, 3 days. And so I would have to plan. Okay, if I'm doing something that's going to sap my energy, then I need to take 3 days off afterwards. So that's how I planned my life. And I remember in 2019 noticing that I no longer had to do that. I went away for a conference. Anyways, it doesn't matter, but I suddenly realized that my energy levels were at a point where I could function pretty normally. So when I say pretty normally, there were certain things that had not come back to 100%. I did still tire easily and need to sleep a lot, and I was not able to work out. I used to be a runner. I used to love working out, and I noticed that my muscles were not recovering when I exercised, even mild exercise. And I did bring this to the attention of my doctor on 2 different occasions, and was not provided with any kind of guidance around that or concern around that, and I didn't pursue it. So this podcast, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be different in that I'm not here to tell you how amazing my journey is and inspire you to come work with me because of my amazing success. I'm going to be real, raw, and honest and share where I've gone wrong, perhaps things that you can learn from and do differently. So this is one of the things. I was so happy to be feeling better, and also I was so focused on my kids and my business. This is going to be a theme in this podcast. So focused on my kids and my business that my health, my physical health, was good enough. It was good enough. I did bring it to the attention of my doctor. They didn't really say anything about it. I continued on my merry way. Our physical bodies, I believe, are the most important things in the world. They are an incredibly powerful tool for creating the life that you want. Oh, I could go on for that, but I'm going to save that for another episode about the importance of the body. But one of the best things you can do for yourself is to really take care of your body on a very deep level. So I did not do that, and I continued with my life, continued prioritizing my business and my kids, and went on my merry way. And over time, I did notice that things were getting worse. I knew there was an underlying condition. I felt it. I mean, literally, I felt it because I was having symptoms, but the symptoms were pretty minor. But I just knew on that deeper level, like when you have a really deep knowing about something, I just knew that something wasn't right. And I ignored it. And it got progressively worse. So fast forward to this year. So it was in 2020 and 2021, I shared things with my doctor, but just kept on going. 2020 and 2021 were actually really wonderful years for me. I know for a lot of people they weren't. And then in 2022, first of all, I got COVID for 30 days. I'll share about that another time. I had a very significant experience with COVID. And then a series of events transpired immediately after, literally back to back to me having COVID. So I had COVID and then took one of my sons off to college out of state, which was wonderful. Of course, there's some level of grief around that and, change in just a major milestone and change in the household and all those kinds of things. The day after, 2 days after I dropped my son off at college, there was a series of events that occurred over the span of 2.5 weeks that involved two of my children. And I won't go into details, but it was quite, I was going to say traumatic, but I don't like that word. It was quite significant. And resulted in one of my kids moving in with his father full time. Now, this was very painful for a number of reasons. But the main reason is that I've already shared my ex has narcissistic personality disorder, or I believe he does. He's not diagnosed. He has worked very hard to negatively impact my relationship with my kids. And here's the crux of my system collapse, I believe. We shall see as I go through this process if I learn something different. But at this point in time, today on the 3rd of January of 2023, this is what I believe is happening. So for the past 7 years, I've really believed that if I did everything right, quote unquote right, loved my children, provided a calm and supportive home for them, I had 50-50 shared custody with my ex, that if I did not speak badly of their father, that if I coordinated with him in the ways that I have learned to do so with a narcissist, that it would result in a positive outcome. And I'm going to be really honest here. I have been a little bit judgmental. A little bit. I'm not a super judgmental person. But nevertheless, I was a little bit judgmental of people who struggled with their kids, whether young children or adult children. And in particular, people who've said that their relationship was lost because an ex had impacted it, or their child was dealing with some difficulties. I judged them and I thought, you must be doing something wrong in order for your child to not have a good relationship with you. And in fact, I have I have heard that from well-intentioned people in my life. When I've talked about their dad, and or when when I was worried about during the midst of this crisis that was occurring with my children, and I was concerned about losing my relationship with my child. People were like, "But surely your child can see that you love him, that you've always done right by him, and surely they can see that their father has been doing like all these really terrible, manipulative, backhanded things. Surely they're intelligent enough to be able to see that and make their own decisions." That is simply not how the brain works. So if you followed my work, you may be familiar with imprinting, or you may just be familiar with it from others' works as well, right? So our brains take on information from our environment and make decisions based on that, create behaviors or patterns of behavior based on the messages that we take on from those experiences. So that's why many of us who've had dysfunctional families of origin keep having repeated patterns in our lives, right? So one of the keys to releasing patterns in your life, or changing patterns, right, from a maladaptive pattern to a positive pattern, is to understand what your imprints are and to change them, which you can do, right? I do that in my process, and other people have other ways of doing that as well. So it stands to reason that if a child hears over and over and over again that one of their parents is a bad person, I'll just simplify it, right? It's a bad person, doesn't love them, doesn't have their best interest of heart. Even if they can see with their own eyes that that's not true, their brains will still believe it. This is why gaslighting works, right? So it's like all these principles that exist in the narcissistic healing community, sometimes maybe we forget how much they can actually impact our children, right? It's why cults exist. It's why people get brainwashed, right? Something can be clearly not in their best interest, and yet when they hear it often enough and hear it in a certain way, they start to believe it. So after my son went to live with his dad, I'm still in contact with him. He has not completely shut me out, but it's a very distant relationship. And I had a conversation with him not too long after he went to go live with his dad, trying to understand exactly what was happening for him, how he was feeling, what was going on, how could we resolve things, right? All the things that I do. And as I listened and observed him, I suddenly realized, he believes all the things his dad has told him about me over the years. And it's not just believing the things that he was told, but my ex never showed me any kind of respect or consideration, even when we were married. So my children grew up not seeing the man in their life love and respect their mother, which is huge. So that's something that I've observed about my kids, despite having a pretty good relationship with them. There is this level of, I see a difference when I see children that are raised in a home where the parents adore each other and respect each other and demand that their children respect both of their parents, right? So that creates a certain kind of imprint if you're raised that way. And if you're raised in a home where the father never shows any kind of consideration or respect for the mother, in my case, or vice versa, right? If one of the parents does not show any kind of respect or consideration for the other, it creates a subconscious message, an imprint that the child is carrying forward. So my son already had that. This is my youngest son. So he had the most time alone in terms of being raised alone with his dad, right? So the past 7 years, from 10 to 17, is aged 10 years old to 17. He's also spent a lot of time hearing negative things about me. And also, all the typical things, being punished if the boys spoke with me while they were with their dad, they would receive punishment, which I didn't know until later. Different tactics along the way, right? All of which sum up to this message that he now has taken on, whatever that may be, even though it does not match his lived experience with me. Doesn't matter. So that realization that everything that I believed and that I've done for the past 7 years in that moment felt invalid. Now, of course, I'm telling you how I felt because I think it's so important. So our bodies are super important. And then, as Dr. Gary Sawyer likes to say, emotions run the world. They really do. So our emotions are really important. So I'm sharing with you how I felt, right? Now, do I really think all of those things are invalid? No. Recall earlier in this episode, I shared how on the cognitive level, I'm very aware of all the things, right? It didn't change how I felt. So certainly I've been able to provide a much smoother home, a much smoother environment in general, because I did not allow their dad to create the level of chaos that he could have created, right? So there's all kinds of positives that I could list that I experienced and my kids experienced because of all the different tools I implemented. It did not prevent my child from being psychologically, from being gaslit, basically, right? And it did not prevent it impacting my relationship with my child. So that was absolutely devastating. And I was in a period of deep grief over that because I felt like I had lost my child. He was my youngest child, so I was not expecting him to be out of my house yet. And I felt like I had lost him. And of course, I know that those relationships can be fixed. And, I'm doing the things that I need to be doing to do that. All things are temporary, right? So this is all the things I know. However, I was in a profound grief. So I was in this profound state of grief that I realized I had never felt before. The grief of having lost my child. Even though he was still here, and I recognize I have the hope to repair that relationship, it was nevertheless a major loss. There's also the very deep anger at my ex and the realization, the feeling that he had won and I had failed. And that fucking narcissism is so insidious. I've heard people call it evil. And at this particular moment in time, I feel that way. It is so vile, so disgusting, and it creeps, it's like poison that seeps down into your mind, into your body, into your soul. Okay, maybe not your soul, but into your mind, into your emotions, into your body, of your children and of yourself. And to see that my ex, after all this time, is continuing, we barely coordinate with we barely have any interaction with each other. So we've always kept we've had a very consistent schedule. So these are the positives of all the tools that I implement, right? We need to interact with each other very little. We have very consistent schedule with the kids. There's very few changes or dramas or manipulations around each of our respective time with the kids. And I had really believed that the worst of things was over. My youngest is 17. And, people kept saying, my friends would say things like, when things did come up, because things do come up, going to court and things like that. But never anything that I felt too stressed over. But when things came up, my friends would be like, well, at least, the kids are 18 soon and this is all going to be over. And it was this realization that it's not fucking over. And it's probably never going to be over. At least that's how I feel in this particular moment. And the fact that this person can continue to try to disrupt his child's relationship with his child's mother is so disgusting and so vile to me. It's not even about me, right? That the narcissist doesn't even care about their child. They're willing to cause so much damage to this child out of whatever emotion they have towards the mother. I don't know if it's hatred. I don't know what they feel. I'm not going to pretend to guess because I don't frankly care what they feel. But it was this realization that my children, two of them in particular, have been deeply, deeply impacted by their dad, that he's continuing to try to negatively impact their relationship with me. And that we're just at the beginning. For those of you that are legacy makers, this is what I'm referring to when I talk about legacy makers, cycle breakers and legacy makers. The road is so much longer than you may think. And as I said, this podcast is not about, a lot of times I think as coaches, we share the beauty to encourage, to inspire you to take that first step. And I'm here to support you if you've been on the path and are wondering, what the actual fuck? Legacy making is not easy, right? Leaving my ex, being a positive role model, implementing all the things that I've implemented over the past 5 to 7 years has not made that legacy I was envisioning for my children, of them being well-adjusted, positively contributing members of society, right? No. We're just at the beginning because they have been hurt. They have been impacted so deeply by the narcissism that their healing journey is only just starting. And as their mother, who intends to walk alongside them whether they are aware of it or not, right? So I may be alongside them with them actually asking for support, or I may just be alongside them observing and witnessing and ready for when they want support. Their journey of healing has only just started. And my desire to break that cycle has only just started. 7 years in.